On February 5th, 1987, the Boston Bruins and Pittsburgh Penguins had a yard sale. The game itself was typical for the 80s, a Mario Lemieux 5-point hat trick to lead the hapless Penguins to a 6-5 loss. The Pens, despite getting a generational talent in the 1984 draft, had remained the same level of mediocre they'd been since they entered the league. The Bruins weren't in the greatest place either in the 15 years since Orr and Esposito led them to a Stanley Cup. They were better than the Penguins, but the Bees were not a top team in the league despite the sterling play of their superstar defenseman Ray Bourque.
Back for Bourque, hits it on the goal and scores!
This game ended in fists, and while Mario watched from the outside of the fray, in the heat of the battle was Boston's best non-Bourque player, Cam Neely, and beside him was veteran defenseman Mike Milbury. Neely was a burgeoning star, just coming into his own as one of the league's first true power forwards. He laid as many crushing hits as he scored goals, and vice versa. Milbury was in his final season as a player, and at this point in his career was best known for climbing into the stands during a game and beating a spectator with his own shoe, which was, by all accounts, deserved. Over the next half-decade, the growth of these two teams would put them on an inescapable collision course. This seemingly innocuous game did end in a brawl, yes, but it was the 80s. This wasn't the start of a brutal hatred between these two teams. It was just foreshadowing. The real inciting moment would come in 1991. In the time between the brawl and the real birth of loathing, the Bruins went from a mediocre playoff team to the top team in the Eastern Conference. 1990 saw the Bees finish as the Wales Conference's top regular season team and reach the Stanley Cup final, and in 1991, Boston once again led the East. Ray Bourque was well on his way to his fourth Norris Trophy in 5 years. Mike Milbury had taken over behind the bench for the 1990 season and flourished as a coach, but more importantly, Cam Neely had become a superstar.
Firing it in, Neely, rebound, scores!
His 55 goals and 92 points in 1990 both led the Bruins in the regular season, while his 12 goals and 28 points through 21 playoff games did the same. He replicated the season in 91 with another 50 goals and another 90 points. The superb Bruins matched up against their little brothers in Hartford in the first round of the playoffs. The massively outmatched Whalers put up a valiant fight against Boston, but their recently acquired young stars John Cullen and Zarley Zalapski couldn't match the power of Bourque, Neely, and his line mate, Hartford native Craig Janney.
Bourque bounces it in and scores! It will be a goal by Janney as it deflected!
Boston's next opponent was the Montreal Canadiens, who they barely survived. Bruins goalie Andy Moog outdueled eventual Hall of Famer Patrick Waugh, but with a hat trick in the pivotal Game 5 win and scoring the Game 7 winner was Cam Neely, who had 7 goals in the series and now 12 in the playoffs.
Drives, scores! Cam Neely from the neutral zone!
Waiting for the Bruins in the conference final was, of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Since the brawl, the Penguins had built up support around their all-time talent captain. They had survived an injury to their elite starting goalie Tom Barrasso in round 1 against the Devils, and waltzed past the Capitals in 5 games, even with an injury to top defenseman Paul Coffey. The Pens' force of nature top line of Lemieux, Mark Recchi, and Kevin Stevens had been uncontainable, but there was plenty of depth on the roster, headlined by elite two-way playmaking center Ron Francis. As you may remember, Hartford had recently acquired 2 of their best players, John Cullen and Zarley Zalapski. Both of those 2 came from the Penguins as part of a massive midseason trade. Francis, the Whalers' captain, was the premier piece of the return to Pittsburgh for the 100-point scorer Cullen and the 22-year-old top-pairing defenseman Zalapski. But alongside Francis came Zalapski's replacements on the Penguins' blue line, an attempt by the Pens to get tougher and more defensively responsible. With Ron Francis came Grant Jennings, and more notably, Ulf Samuelsson. Game 1 at the Boston Garden, the Bruins tore through Barrasso, and Neely's second goal of the night proved to be the eventual game winner.
Neely going in, scores!
In the second game of the series, coverage of Neely tightened, with Samuelsson glued to the star.
Gianni to Neely. Neely is buried by Samuelsson.
While the nearly unstoppable Neely was limited to one goal, space opened up for the rest of the Bruins, and Vladimir Ruzicka won the game in overtime, giving the Bruins a 2-0 stranglehold on the series. The game was ugly from the start, with scrums throughout, but it started when Grant Jennings of the Penguins fought Chris Nilan, though both were only given 2 minutes. Nilan was really the only true classic enforcer in the series at that point, your take-on-all-comers fighter. Though he was strangely an all-star in 1991 because Mike Milbury got to name the team. The Penguins had some gritty guys, but only one was in Nyland's stratosphere in terms of penalty minutes: Ulf Samuelsson. Ulf didn't get into a big scrum during the game, but he did head to the box for a cross-check on Neely in front of the net. As a Swede in the 80s, Samuelsson did everything in his power to shed the stereotype of soft Euros that had been tacked on to so many of his countrymen. Samuelsson wasn't the brawler that Nyland was, but he would fight, though he averaged 5 to 10 fights per season as opposed to Nyland's 15 to 30. Ulf racked up his penalty minutes not through fights, but through just overt nastiness. This clip of the two tough guys from 1986 really encapsulates their brands. Samuelsson cracks Nyland with a cross-check to the head, Nyland pounds on him, then Ulf tries to take out the enforcer's leg at the end of the fight. Nyland went about his business for the sake of the code, which gave him some degree of respect even when he'd butt-end a player in the face.
Oh, butt-ended, middled it right in the face. How can Nyland possibly say to Kerry Fraser, how come you're calling me?
Whether you care about the code or not, it's clear that Samuelsson had no interest in it. Despite both players having been overtly violent, raking in tons of penalty minutes, and even both fighting Cam Neely, they were not the same. Game 3, and there was Chris Nilan fighting again. The Penguins won the game on the back of Francis, Stevens, and Lemieux, but that's not what anyone remembers. In the second, Ulf hurt Cam Neely.
His shot blocked by Cam Neely. They got Neely messed up, and now Neely is hit by Ulf Samuelsson at center.
The Swedish defenseman blew out the Bruins' knee with his own. No excuse, dirty hit, no penalty. Because the play is usually seen in a vacuum, I feel like most people don't know that the play didn't stop immediately. Oh, but when it did, Mike Milbury was looking for a shoe.
He's unbelievable.
Is Milbury a guy that I personally like? No. But he was right to be incensed here. At some point, he picked up a stick and carried it around, smacking it against the glass. When Milbury filled out his lineup for Game 4, it was clear he wasn't interested in the series anymore. He just wanted Samuelsson to pay.
The video this morning, and I couldn't even tell what's in the video, so if he says it's a knee, I'm sure it's a knee. I don't know why they would lie, but I was just trying to stand him up and hit him in the neutral zone.
He added size and grit on his blue line in Alan Peterson and the unproven but large Pittsburgh native Bob Beers. But more importantly, he took more goons out of storage. Nyland was a decent enough player to keep in the lineup. Milbury broke out the guys that weren't. Into the lineup came Lyndon Byers and Nevin Marquardt. They knew why they were there.
Hey, what do you call me, a goon? What do you think, I'm a goon? Well, what's because I got 830 minutes of penalties in 200 games? What does that consider? I mean, what do I got? I got 29 goals. I got 2 goals this year. Don't pressure me.
Now, you would assume one of these guys took Neely's place, but no. The Bruins star marched out on one leg for Game 4. The Bruins lost that game, didn't really get to Samuelsson, and though they wounded Lemieux, they were unable to slow him down. Neely, who had been truly superb, was clearly hurt and couldn't drive the Bruins' offense that didn't have particularly great depth scoring. In Game 5, the Penguins walked by the Bees 7-2. Samuelsson scored number 7.
Mario Lemieux made a couple of good moves on Janney. The shot by Samuelsson, he scores!
The Bruins put together a normal lineup for Game 6, but even though Neely found himself on the score sheet again, the Penguins' momentum couldn't be stopped, and they were on to the Stanley Cup final where they would win their franchises first. The Bruins were left with just a small moral victory. They were the team that was seeking justice even through throwing their season away. But for a team as good as they were, a moral victory wasn't good enough. The muscle around Neely's injured knee started to turn to bone, and though he managed a goal per game when in the lineup in 1992, he dressed for only 9.
The only satisfaction comes when Ulf Samuelsson receives an unscheduled dental check.
I hate to see that.
When Boston got their chance for a rematch in the 1992 conference final, there was no Cam. Despite the Kill Ulf banners hung by fans in the Garden, the Bruins were swept, and the Penguins and Ulf Samuelsson won their second Stanley Cup shortly thereafter. In 1993, Neely, still plagued by injuries, tried to fight Samuelsson to settle the score, and Ulf just wouldn't. That same year, in a piece by John Schur of Sports Illustrated titled simply Mr. Dirty, players from around the league gave their opinion on Samuelsson, and they were, overwhelmingly negative. Responding to the criticism, Samuelsson just shrugged. "I know a lot of guys in the league can beat the shit out of me," he says, "but I'm not going to change my attitude. The day I change my attitude is the day I go back to Sweden and play in the non-contact league." The quote from the piece that really personified Samuelsson: "I'm not going to say I'm a clean player," he says, "because I'm not. But I don't think I've ever intentionally tried to hurt someone. Unless I got hurt myself, then I like to get even." Cam had one great season left, scoring 50 goals in 49 games in 94, a testament to his immense talent that never got to fully bloom. After a couple more solid partial seasons, in 1996, Neely called it a career at just 31. Even though he recovered from the knee injury, he now needed a hip replacement for his degenerative hip condition. Samuelsson's hit may not have ended Neely's career, but it gutted the prime of one of the most electric players in the league.
You know, I don't really respect the way that he plays the game of hockey. I mean, injuries are part of the game. Everybody realizes that. But I just don't respect the way that he plays the game. I mean, and some people might think that I'm just bitter towards him, which, you know, I probably am a little bit, but...
Then, 14 years later, a Penguin ruined another career. In a whatever game in March, Marc Savard shot a puck on net. Savard had led the Bruins in points every year since he signed with the team prior to the 06-07 season. A season in which he had more assists than any other Bruin had points.
Savard score!
He was one of the NHL's most consistent scorers. Then Matt Cooke hit him.
Drops it off and a high shot sails over the shoulder. Oh, one of the Bruins just got blasted. Matt Cooke hit.
It was a dirty blindside hit to the head. Not a penalty technically speaking, but it would be banned officially very soon after. Bergeron told off Cooke, who looked indignant. Cooke's teammates he stood behind looked disturbed. Savard went off on a stretcher. His career was ruined. It was another hit in a long line of hits for Cooke, to the point where even his teammate, Bill Guerin, sided with the Bruins. In fact, it was the respected veteran who relayed to Cooke that he needed to answer for the hit by fighting Sean Thornton.
And they said to Billy Guerin, "You go in the room and you tell Matt Cooke he fights Sean Thornton the first shift, or this game is going to get ugly quick, and we're going to be all over the SportsCenter highlights for all the wrong reasons."
When I say Cooke's rap sheet was long, I mean long. Unlike Ulf, who was a menace in an era full of menaces and enforcers that supposedly kept him in check, Cooke was one of the last of a dying breed. There were only a couple other players like Steve Downey and Sean Avery that fit into Cooke's mold of aggressive antagonists, while enforcers were rarely full-time players anymore. Since he joined the Penguins, Cooke really took his behavior to the next level with awful hit after awful hit, many of which, including this hit on Savard, went without supplemental discipline. Colin Campbell was the NHL's head of discipline at the time and was ultimately the one who made the decision not to suspend Cooke. In the fall of 2010, Campbell had emails leak out in which he called Marc Savard a little fake artist and complained to officials that they were calling too many penalties on his son Gregory. In 2016, even more emails from the time were released to the public, and Mike, what are you doing here? Following the Savard hit, Mike Milbury, now an NBC analyst, reached out to Campbell to say that he agreed with not suspending Cooke, documented by SB Nation's Mary Clark and Patrick Iverson. Milbury, you should feel good. You got it right in the face of mania and pressure from above, I am sure. Being right is better than being PC. Campbell, I'm sorry, Boston, but someone should teach that young man, Savard was 32, something about keeping his head up. Hitting is a vital aspect to everything our game is about, and we may be adjusting it too much if we are not careful and give in to the masses. Canada certainly loved Rick Smash Nash running everyone in the Olympics. Colin Campbell was Savard's first coach in the NHL, and he saw Marc leave the ice on a stretcher, and his big takeaway was he should have kept his head up. Though Savard came back and played in the 2010 playoffs, he wasn't the star the Bruins had just a few months earlier. Maybe if he's at full power, the Bruins survive the David Krejci injury and don't get reverse swept by the Flyers in the second round. Savard didn't get to play a role in the Bruins' march to a Stanley Cup in 2011. For many people, seeing Savard like that would have been the end. Maybe getting beaten to a pulp by Sean Thornton would have made it click, but Cooke kept on. He boarded Fedor Tutin and got suspended, then he elbowed Ryan McDonough in the head, and that was the last straw. In the wake of Sidney Crosby's concussions, the Penguins and now owner Mario Lemieux had been very vocal proponents of taking headshots out of the game, and they could no longer defend the headshot proponent on their own roster. Cooke took a massive suspension following the hit on McDonough and had an intervention of sorts with the Penguins brass. He admitted to media that he had to change. A sad reality of life is that some people refuse to develop empathy toward a situation until it hits close to home, whether it's a social cause or disease or whatever else. Cooke was like that with headshots. It took his teammate, his captain, nearly having his career ruined by a headshot, for Matt to finally realize he was in the wrong. It shouldn't have taken that. Cooke spent the remainder of his career as a mostly clean player. Despite his reputation as a danger following him into his post-career days, he does get good reviews as a person. But I'm sure many of you aren't interested in a redemption story, and the Bruins weren't either. Even after Thornton exacted revenge on Cooke, it didn't suddenly make the Bruins like him. Pittsburgh media gave Cooke a vote for the Lady Byng, and then nominated him for the Masterton. Longtime Bruins play-by-play guy Jack Edwards had something to say.
Could not help but notice last season when the Pittsburgh writers nominated Matt Cooke for the Masterton Award for dedication and perseverance to hockey. The justification being how Cooke had changed his ways after basically assassinating Marc Savard. Nominating Cooke for the Masterton is about the equivalent of nominating Sirhan Sirhan as the prisoner of the year.
I'm Colleen Sullivan, live from ABC 7. Breaking news: Governor Gavin Newsom has denied parole for Sirhan Sirhan, the man who assassinated Robert F. Kennedy in 1968.
Listen, if you know anything about the media surrounding these two cities, you know they both have always had their fair share of dumb guys, with Pittsburgh media tripping over themselves to get the man ordained, and Boston media still wanting to put the man on trial for war crimes. In 2016, Savard told the Boston Globe's Stan Grossfield that Cooke called him after the game, but, quote, "I wasn't in any mood to talk to him that night, so I never talked to him. I never heard from him." Cooke told the story differently in a 2024 piece by Joshua Cloak of The Athletic. Quote, "Cooke has never spoken to Savard. He said he tried to get in touch for a month after the hit. You can only get rejected so many times," Cooke says softly. Cooke maintains that the play was legal at the time, but admits that it would be a massive suspension today. He says it's the one thing about his career he would change. Cooke didn't exactly do himself any favors in the Boston public forum by plowing Adam McQuaid into the boards and getting thrown out of a game in the 2013 playoffs. This time, the Bruins dusted the Pens to head to the Stanley Cup Final. In a full-circle moment from 1991, Matt Cooke's final game with the Penguins was a conference final loss to the Bruins.
Do you think he'd do this stuff against Gretzky if Semenko was there? Do you think he'd do this against Yzerman if Probert was there? No, that's what I'm trying to tell you. He wouldn't do that stuff. It is unbelievable what this guy does.